And recording. The time is 6:01 p.m. and it is, what is it? It is September 26th, 2018, regularly scheduled meeting of ITSC 2347 Advanced Database Programming. I'm going to show you this. I'm going to be showing you some code in this particular time. And I'm not really interested in, don't copy my code. You don't have to make yours look exactly like mine. I'm going to give you some pointers. When I say some things about this game, I'm not interested in making anything hard about the game, about playing the game. I've written this thing and I've used this one enough. There's a series of programs that we use, and then I get to be the expert at them, but I know what works and I know what doesn't, and I know blind alleys in it. Let me first start out by a couple of announcements, I guess. On Friday, I have a 10 o'clock class, and some of you from time to time have come to the 10 o'clock class for something, just to see me. I will not be in the 10 o'clock class day after tomorrow. That's Friday. I will be online tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock is when I will do the lecture. That's a 2309 class, so that's the intro to SQL. Really doesn't impact us at all. Other questions? Now I've chosen not to do paper and pencil tests. When we get to the advanced class, writing a test becomes very hard and kind of irrelevant. Asking you questions about programming in an advanced programming class, you're supposed to program. So that's what we're going to do. Okay. Procedural questions. I'll be online tomorrow at 8 o'clock. If you, at about 9:30 or so, I'll be on Zoom at my usual meeting ID. And from 9 o'clock I'll be about 9:30. Yeah, a.m. Yes, I should have said that. 9 a.m., 9:30 a.m. I'm going to come on at 8 o'clock. I'm going to do my lecture, record it, and upload it. So the 2309 class, that's not this class. That has nothing to do with us, really. You don't have to be there. You don't have to go get that particular lecture. So I'm just pointing out, sometimes people from this class will want to come to that class at 12 o'clock. I have lab. Sometimes people show up then. So don't do it on Friday because I won't be here. Some questions that have come up. Let's see, I'm going to roll this back for Mary a little bit. Here is a function that I think would work. It is just a pretty silly little function that says basically if some condition 0 is equal to 0, it usually is. That should be true, but return 1. So it's a function. It has no parameters. If 0 is equal to 0, return 1, else return 0. This function will not work. Why? I'm trying to say your name. San. This went to your question earlier. I thought it was important enough to put up here. So why won't that work? Who is that? Is that Donna? Yeah, hi, Donna. Well, what if I were to try to execute it? I'm going to get an error message. It says procedure, not a procedure, that's a function. The last statement must be a return statement. Okay, I think this is a bug in our programming language personally, because the last statement, the last physical statement, it's irrelevant whether it's a return statement or not. The last logical statement is a return statement. The last statement that gets executed is a return statement. But it would not accept this, even though it's perfectly good logic. Nothing wrong with this logic. Nothing in the world wrong with this function. If you change it a little bit, what you have to do is you have to declare a variable. In your if logic, you set the variable to the return value you want. Then when you get to the end, you return that variable. I don't like that, but I have to live with it.
So that means we can only return a variable?
No. You could return 3, but the last statement has to be a return.
So what is the last statement? I mean, the end? So it doesn't count as
That's not my department, man. I didn't write this language. I'm just telling you that this, this one's inside of an else, therefore it doesn't see it as the last statement. It ought to be the last statement. It's the last statement as far as I can see. I don't see one solitary thing wrong with that function logically. But it won't work. I don't sit here and rag on the language. I don't. You will never hear me saying, "Oh, I hate this textbook." I've known teachers that would do that. I've had teachers that would do that. "Oh, this is a terrible textbook." Well, then why'd you make us buy it? "Oh, I hate this. I hate Microsoft Access." Well, don't teach it then. Right? I mean, I'm not fond of it. I'm not particularly fond of SQL Server of TSQL. Nonetheless, it is in common use. Lots of places use it, particularly around here. It's probably one of your most saleable languages. Now, if I wanted to get the something I liked better, I would be using PLSQL. I like the language better. But when I was an undergraduate, I drove a taxi cab, and I didn't worry about did I like the car. I didn't worry about did I like the interior. I just took it and drove it for the night. That's all. It wasn't anything to me one way or the other. I'm the same way about a programming language. I do what that programming language can do, and I stay inside of what it will do. I do the things it tells me to do. And it tells me I have to have my last statement has to be a return. Let me show you another one. Okay, so this is the way I would write it. Thus, here's another one. What about this? I'm not sure what's going to happen here. Now this one, this one will compile. Success. Why do I not like this logic? But if I put an else in here, as I should, it won't compile. Yeah. This is what we call punch-out logic. Notice that if it returns 1, we never get here. It returns 1, boom, we're gone. Then what happens to that return 0? Do we keep executing or not? Now, I don't know what's going to happen here if db O dot test3 equals 0, no, equals 1. Do I have to have parentheses? There. It's expecting the empty. You just have to learn that stuff. Does it expect empty parentheses? You just have to try it. Some do, some don't. What do you think we'll see? What? It's supposed to return 1. I'm not going to bet on it. I'm not putting any money on it. I don't know how it's going to behave. This is going to test it for me. The answer is, the question that I'm asking here by running this test is, when I hit that return, does it exit the function? Yes or no? Okay. Yes, I'm talking about this guy, test 1. This is true. Therefore, I'm going to execute that return 1. Will it stop executing there, or will it continue to execute until it gets here? What? If it behaves like most languages do, it will stop. Put it over there. I'm not sure, but let's try it and find out. How many think it's going to stop? I don't care. You don't have to raise your hand. Let's find out what it does. Execute, and boom, 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 boom. It printed 1. So it did execute. Will every language do that every time? A language is usually consistent. So I would expect if I kept running it, it would keep doing it. And I would expect that if I said return something, blah, 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 return, 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 I would expect that first one I hit to be the one that happened, and then the rest of it not happen. This is poor programming logic. I do not like this type of logic where in C programmers love it. C programmers will do it all the time, you know. For example, a C programmer would write ladder logic, you know, if the character is A or B or C, return 2. If the is D, E, F, return 3, else D, E, F, H, I, J, return 4, and so on. That would work in C, but it won't always work. I suspect it will work in this language. It is poor practice to program that way. I would always have an else. It is better practice to have an else. The problem with it is that as soon as I put that else in there and I do it like I'm supposed to do it, it doesn't work. Oh well. So I call this, I don't like this logic. I suppose that if I were writing the procedure, I would write it like test 2. I would go ahead and get myself a local variable, set the local variable, and then when I got to the end, return that local variable. That keeps both of us happy. Question? What is this? Okay. Let's see, what else is there? Procedures and parameters in programming are pretty straightforward. They all do about the same thing. There are little differences, like that one I was just pointing out. They're slightly different from one to the other. They are different. We were working with a problem. The question was, is an output parameter also an input parameter? You just have to test it, right? So we, at the beginning, did I not save that? I guess I didn't save it. We set up a procedure and we passed an output parameter. We set it up with an output parameter, and I printed the value of the output parameter. The first line of the procedure printed the value of the output parameter, and then the second line of the procedure changed the value of the output parameter. Then in the main in the executing program, I set a variable to 3 or something, 13, I forget what it was, and then called the procedure and then print the value of the variable. So I believe the procedure printed the variable and then set it to 100 and then exited. So when I called it, I put a 3 or a 13 or something into it. I knew what it was. I executed the procedure, and when the procedure executed, it printed 13. In other words, the output parameter was also an input parameter. Okay. Then it changed it and sent it back, and when I got back into the main program and printed it, it was what I changed it to, 100. So an output parameter in this language is also an input parameter. Okay. This is the way parameters usually work, not always. Sometimes you have an input parameter, an output parameter, and an input-output parameter. Doesn't always work. If I see an in-out parameter, so I have an in parameter, out parameter, and an in-out. If I see that, I know that it's copying the parameters in and then copying the parameters out. When I see that an output parameter is also an input parameter, then I know that what it's doing for the output parameter is it's passing the memory address in. Okay. And I know I have to pass a variable. If it is strictly an input parameter, I should be able to pass 23 just fine. And it just makes a copy of it as it comes in. The copies, if you change it, it's just discarded. Okay. Okay, procedures tend to do the same things in all programming languages. They tend to be the same in all programming languages. There's really not any difference in a procedure in Pascal, a procedure in this language, or a procedure in C for that matter. And don't tell me that there aren't procedures in C. They just call them void functions. And then they get into arguments with people like me who says, that's a procedure. There's no such thing as a void function. Function has to return a value. And it's just a function that doesn't return a value, they tell me. And I say, yeah, that's what you call a procedure. So we have them. All languages have them. And whenever you define a procedure, you have to do certain things. It's like when you start a car. All cars are the same. And you say, if you own a BMW, you probably would disagree with me. But it's a procedure, and you have some way that it specifies procedure. It might say PROC, it might say procedure. You might get away with it, like in this language, you can say PROC if you want to. If you do, that's fine. I don't have a big in an advanced programming class, I start giving you a little bit of leeway on the shortening the syntax. I figure you know what you're doing. Okay. For example, in the advanced programming class, you get to drop as most of the time. And so you can just declare at foo int. You don't have to say as. I'm going to go ahead and say it, but you don't have to. We have to give it a name. We give it a parameter list. We have something that says begin. In our case, it's BEGIN. We have something that says end, and inside of it is a series of statements. We can have local variables in there. So it is a program that is a standalone program. In the parameter list, I have to give you the name and the type. Is it for input or output? Can it be called with, okay, for example, P1 is for input, P2 is for output. I'm not trying to write TSQL code here. This is an example. When it's called, I call it, and I pass the parameters by position usually. Usually, parameters are passed by position. These are the actual parameters. They're actually variables. Or I could have just passed for the input parameter, I could have passed 3. Just a copy. The formal parameters are up here. So the first actual parameter gets matched to the first formal parameter, the second actual parameter to the second formal parameter, and so on until you run out. Or perhaps in some languages, they allow you to pass parameters by name because the names for P1 and P2, notice I have deliberately switched them. Now the order doesn't matter. I'm passing them by name. TSQL allows us to do either one. My preference is position. My preference. I didn't say it had to be yours. It's your code. I'm not writing it. Questions? You do the same thing. A function. Function, you have a function name. You have a parameter list, or some people call them arguments. If you're a mathematician, you call them arguments. And then a return type. And then a series of statements. Functions typically do not modify their parameters. Functions typically only return a value, and they're not supposed to do anything else. Sometimes they do. In C programming, a function, C programmers always are changing the parameters of their functions. It drives me nuts. And if I'm the supervisor of that programming shop, you better not change your parameters. And then I'll turn around and, oh, wow, wouldn't it be a good idea if we could do that? So you never, ever change your parameters unless you have a really good reason. Most of the time in a function, you don't. So in an academic setting, a function does not change its parameters, even if you can. You cannot pass, in this language, you cannot pass an output parameter to a function. Questions? Now, that said, questions on that? Okay, let me move on here. We're not going to have tests, everybody says. Kind of like we got good news and bad news. Let's don't do tests. We're going to program. Now, the first program, this is kind of like test 1 here. First program is essentially writing procedures and functions. It's what I'm looking for here. I'm going to tell you how I think the tables should be written. Let you write them, okay? What you name stuff, what you name the tables, what you name the constraints, what you name the fields is your business. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. Don't copy mine. Make up your own names. Now, first of all, let me talk about the way I write a complicated program, and this program will be, moderately complicated, I guess. I break it into files in the order that I'm going to run them. So I prepend it. Notice that all of those file names, those are SQL files, and they're all prepended with a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. And then at the very end, the one I want always to run last. So the first one I want to run is 1. I think I have to create the sequences next. Functions or procedures next. So 1, 2, 3, 4 come in that order. 5, I create the triggers. I did not tell you you had to create triggers. I want to talk about triggers today. That's in the next piece of it. Then I create some views. I did not tell you you had to create a view. I think they would be a nice addition to this code, and you might need one when we get to when we get to the front end.
So if you were to put indexes on foreign keys, would that just be associated with the tables script, right?
Right, you would build an index, create the index after you created the table. So yes, you could put indexes. I have not done that. The question was, should we have indexes on the foreign keys? And yeah, it'd be good. Okay, it'd be a plus. I would create the indexes as 1.1 or 1.2 or something like that in here, some between 1 and 2.
So you wouldn't include it in 1?
Oh, you could. You could. Certainly could. What you put in there, I like to keep my my steps as simple as possible, because I like to have as little code in one of these files as I can and do something meaningful. It's easier to troubleshoot, because if it's throwing an error, I like to not have to, I like to execute each line at a time. So I'm going to execute 30 or 40 lines, and then I break to another program. So if I'm doing something different, in my opinion, creating an index is different from creating a table. Let's look at creating the tables. The one, create the tables. First thing I do, drop the tables. Come up with a naming convention. Come up with a naming convention that makes sense to you. Now, notice I created a database. So create your own database, RPSDB, or whatever you want to name it. I like that name. Yeah, go ahead and use that name, and then I won't have to change yours. Don't use APDB, please. So drop the rounds, drop the games, drop the players. I got 3 tables. Okay. I strongly suggest that you keep 3 tables. And the way while I'm losing my my arrows there, okay, whatever the
you enable editing, it'll put it in the right format.
okay. Thank you. Okay, players is the top one. Players doesn't have any foreign keys into anything. The P1 ID and P2 ID from games reference the players. The game ID in rounds references the game ID in games. If you call them players, games, rounds, that's fine. Like I say, I'm not trying to tell you what to name them. I see 3 fields in the players table. Now, if you want to put another one in, if you want to add in a email address, that's fine. Go ahead. You can come back and add that in later. Yeah, just run your scripts again. This one, RPS Games. I have the game. This is the player's real name. So there's the player's game name, nom de RPS. Here we have the game ID. This game ID is assigned, I assigned this one by sequence. I told you that you could assign the PID either by sequence or let the user choose it. I let the user choose it. That was my approach. If you have a different one, fine. It's not really about rock, paper, scissors. Okay, so round ID is assigned by sequence. The game ID references the GID in the games table, and these are what I call the tokens. In other words, that's an R or a P. And a date. Notice I do not store the winner. I can calculate the winner. Name cannot be null and must have at least one character. I don't know. I'm not too worried about that, but I think since I said that, we'll enforce that. So it cannot be null, and the length has to be greater than 0. Essentially, everything is not null. And I have this constraint, right, this pair of constraints right there. So P1 ID is less than P2 ID. In other words, they're ordered. They can't be equal. P1 ID has to be the lesser. And unique P1, P2. Once I say unique, I have created an index. Okay. Now, I did not create an index on P1 ID and another index on P2 ID. I have one index on the pair.
So having said that, there's an index on that composite. I've already got an index on P1 and an index on P2.
If they are foreign keys and you create an index, I'm going to applaud. Because a foreign key, and these tables are simulating tables that are really going to get big. So if you have an index and on the P1 and P2 is a primary key in another table, it would make perfect sense to have an index on P1 and an index on P2 in the games table.
Okay, so getting back to my question that you answered, I guess, but I didn't quite get it. If there's a composite index on P1 and P2, that really doesn't bias it.
The question is, if you have a compound index, composite compound, an index on 2 fields, can you also have an index on each single field? Is that your question?
Well, you can, but what I'm wondering is, you benefit from having the individual indexes when you have a composite index. Is it
Well,
is it
yeah. The question is, will you look it up often by that? Is that something that you're going to search on? Will you commonly search the games table on P1 ID? That's a question you have to answer. I'm not going to try to second guess that. Okay.
What is the purpose you put the two index in P1?
It's because in general, when you have a lot of records and on something that's a foreign key, it makes for easier searching.
Question was asked, what is the purpose of indexing P1 ID?
P1 people will be a lot. The game wrong ID will be a lot, because even though the 2-3 players could be unlimited.
We're going to have
Right.
millions of players.
Yeah.
This is going to be global. This is
We're
gonna be
pretending
huge.
that anyway. Anytime you have a foreign key that is typically a good candidate for an index. If something is a foreign key, I think very seriously that is a very good argument for making it, that alone is a good argument for making it an index. The thing that would sometimes I will make a foreign key into, you'll see people might come along and do this. They might say rounds, or no, tokens. And in tokens, they have the character R, the character P, the character S. And they make token 1 a foreign key into the tokens table. Token 2 is a foreign key. Therefore, that stops me from putting an invalid play in there. The other thing it lets me do, the reason I would like to do that maybe, is we might change the game from rock, paper, scissors to rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock. Is it lizard or wizard? Lizard, okay. So now we have L and SP, I guess. K for Spock. Anyway, it's the same thing. It's the same game. Now you have 5 tokens instead of 3. 2 of them win, 2 of them lose, 1 of them ties. So it allows you to grow. If I have a field called, if I have a table called departments, and then my field would be department ID references departments, that stops me from putting in an invalid department. This referential integrity, basically it just blocks me from putting in something that's wrong, and it allows me to go in and add more departments. So if I'm expecting to grow, that's a good way to do it. But I would not index that field because I don't have very many values in there. Right. If I only have three values in the table, it's a waste of time to index it.
Because you were using the analogy, I think, in the other class about you wouldn't like index zip code. That, in general,
Right.
it's not a good candidate.
Yeah, you need it's called a high cardinality. In other words, if I specify one of those things, do I get back just a few values, or do I get back most of the table? In that case, it's
Return on investment.
okay.
So let's summarize. So if the P1, P2 going to put an index, and then we should put the third index in the MID in the long table.
Well, the game and we're talking about the games table now. Okay.
So what I say is the entire program should be 3 index. Not only P1, P2, also in the long MID.
In the games table, we're talking the games table. Okay. We're talking about the games table, correct?
I understand.
Okay, there is an index on the primary key, GID, game ID, what I call. It's created. There is an index on the unique P1, P2. The question is, do we want an index build? Do we want to build an index on P1 and build an index on P2? That's a judgment call.
So let me ask you another question is if we build an index in the P1, P2, in the later, are we going to use this index or just for performance?
Question was, if we built an index on P1, for example, let's just say P1, anytime that we search on P1, the system will use the index.
I understand the index purpose. What I don't understand is what in this program, the purpose of rock, paper, scissors, what you put the index is just the increase performance, or do you use the index to
The question is, why do we normally put an index? We put an index to increase search performance. Indexes increase search performance, and they slow down insertion, updates, and deletes. Okay. These 2 constraints are important in the games table. The rounds table, no null fields. The GID is a primary key, and R1 token is token 1 is RPS, both of them. Notice some things about this. In the rounds table, I do not have the players' IDs. They're not there. I have to go through the games table to get the players' IDs. I guess I can just go ahead. Okay. Here are my tables. I keep them nice and simple. Here I have 3 fields. I have 3 constraints that stop them from being null. Primary key is a not null constraint. When we get to the games table, I have not null, not null. I set up my 2 foreign keys, and the last 2 constraints are the ones that keep it from, look at what I'm doing up here. Don't try to copy it all. But my last 2, they don't have to be the last 2. That's the way I set it up. Okay, so mine starts. Okay, my first 4, the way I wrote it, are not nulls. The next 2 are foreign keys. And the next 2 are the ones that keep it from getting duplicate games. So if I check that P1 is less than P2, that throws out equals. P1 can't equal P2, and it throws out reverse games. Can't have Bob playing Joe and then Joe playing Bob. The table won't accept it. And then I require that they be unique. This constraint right there sets up an index. It's there. You don't have to create it.
Do you have a preference, like using what I did was I used alter table at constraint? Preference, or do you want to constraint?
Alter is a 4-letter word.
Oh, okay.
To some people. No, I prefer to put the constraints in as I create the table. Now, the book might do it differently, and I personally prefer them in the table code. That's one that I definitely put in the table. Altering a table will many times lead to fragmentation, particularly if you're adding fields. Alter table, add a field. Now, if you're adding a constraint, lots of times people will put the constraints in, then they will alter the table and turn the constraint off, because if it will make inserting data faster, because it doesn't have to check the constraint. Particularly if you have a unique constraint, if you turn it off, it won't check, because for unique, it has to check the whole table.
So by it being part of the definition, it can't be sort of turned off.
It can be. I can alter the table, and essentially I say, if you look up how to do it, you put, well, it's different in different database platforms. You don't drop the constraint. You just say no check constraint name. And then to turn it back on, alter table check constraint foo. In Oracle, the syntax is slightly different. Question?
What does the constraint name games for the check constraint? What is that?
Which one?
The constraint name games order.
Games order. It orders player 1 has to be less than player 2. So if Bob and Joe are playing a game, Bob will be player 1, Joe will be player 2. It won't take them in any other order. So Bob has to come first in the alphabet, then Joe. They can't be equal, and Joe can't come first. That what that does, it allows me to say that I have one, and this isn't something I'm just adding to the game. This is something that will make our lives much, much easier as we proceed with this. Trust me on that. If we enforce that constraint, then if I have 2 players and I say, what is their game number? I will get exactly one answer to that. It's either null, it doesn't exist, or it is a unique integer. I'm not going to get 2 games back or 10. Yeah. So if you know, Bob and Charles are in a game, Bob will have to be player 1, Charles has to be player 2. And then Charles and Dale are playing, Charles is player 1, Dale is player 2. They can't be equal, and they have to be unique as a pair. Okay, so Bob gets to be in as many games as Bob wants to be in, But the pair, Bob and Charles, it happens only once. If you don't enforce that, it leads to madness later. Trust me. Oh, well, let's get that one down right away. I'm going to make that a requirement, because after we get that one down, you can do about anything you want. But that one's got to hold. Notice that I'm what am I doing here? I just go through it. I end mine with a go. I don't have to end it with a go. Basically, I just create the fields, and then I just plow right through the constraints in order. I don't get particularly wild with them. I don't think I put in the length greater than 0. Might have, but you can put that in. You'll have a constraint on every field.
What you want to do is like do a right trim and a left trim.
Right trim and left trim. Well, you trim off trailing spaces. You do, yeah.
Have like three.
Right. You don't have to worry about trailing spaces. You right trim, it does not count in comparisons. Yeah. Didn't that pop up somewhere? I thought I hit a problem with that, because I was trying to compare and I wanted to get the trailing spaces. I think we were doing the word count program. When we were doing word count, did we count the words in the for loop? Yeah. It was trimming spaces on the right automatically, so it wasn't, and I wanted to get those spaces. So when you compare, it just throws away trailing spaces. Leading spaces count, trailing spaces typically don't.
So when I've got the left trim and right trim, I can get rid of the right trim.
Yeah, if you're going to L trim and R trim, it's fine. Good idea. Talking about from a name, do we trim the spaces? Okay. Yeah, I think that's cool. I would applaud. A lot of this you have control over it. Gee, you didn't trim. I'm not going to get too worried about that. If you do, it's good. Let's go. Sequences, I have to drop the sequences, and the only thing I do with the sequence is I start with 1. I am creating them as int. If you create them as big int, that's fine. Probably aren't going to have 255 players in what we do, but go ahead and make them int. Have a start with 1 in there. In this language, if you don't start with 1, they start with the negative number of greatest magnitude. Oracle does not do that. In Oracle, it doesn't do negative numbers. Start with, you can look at the other options you have. You can increment by 5, so you can start with 5 and increment by 5, so then your game numbers will be 5, 10, 15, 20, and so on. The reason I like sequences better than identities is because I have more control over them. I need 2 sequences, drop them. Well, functions, I'm going to define 2 functions. I'm going to define a function that I call isThere. isThere takes a player ID as an argument, and it returns a 0 or a 1, tiny int. Basically, he just looks at the table. Is he there? If he's there, return the count. So if it's 0, better not be more than 1. So it returns either 0 or 1. And then I have another function that I'm calling getGameID. This one I think will come in handy later when I get to the web form. I don't use this one for anything. This one I'm going to use. My getGameID is an important function because what it does is it takes two player names, and returns to me the game ID that they play. Now, I don't know how I'm going to get those players. I don't know that player 1 is going to be player 1 and player 2 is going to be player 2. I don't know that. They might say get game ID Bob Joe, or they might say get game ID Joe Bob. It has to work either way. Okay? So, to that end, I'll show it to you briefly. If they're not in the right order, swap them. Declarative, yes. Sometimes you will not be able to write these parameters. Sometimes you will have to put the parameters in a temporary variable that you define. It won't let you change the parameters. They are input-only parameters. This language is letting me change them. It's usually an error. In this case, it's not. So I'm changing them. So if they come to me as Joe, Bob, I change them. What do? I have a local variable, T. T gets P1 ID, P1 ID gets P2 ID, P2 ID gets T. Straight out of Programming 101. And then go in there and select Game ID from RPS Games and return it. Pretty straightforward. See if this goes to the correct place. I don't know why it's going to SQL code and not to my flash drive. What's the next one? Okay, here's the procedures. I'm going to show you one of them. Now, these procedures are pretty straightforward. Okay? Not init. I'm not. Okay, first thing, this is where I want us to document, and I gave you my documentation. I want you to write your own, in your own words. Okay, so I sent you my documentation in the file. This is what the user of this code has to have. This is what's going to be made public to the world. Okay, the procedure name. You have to document your procedure name. I can't see it unless I know its name. There's no way I can say, hey, what can I see? It'll only execute it if I know its name.
So is the user going to know that?
I just told the user that right here.
But why would you tell the user the procedure name when that's something that the web form?
Because the web form is the user.
Oh, okay. With the person user. Okay.
Yeah, the user is somebody upstream from us, and that's the web form. Yeah. So the web form has its own login ID. The web form you can log in. When you log in to the web form, you're logging in there. The web form logs into the database through the firewall. I'm not going to let people come in from outside and touch my database. They're going to have to go through 3 or 4 firewalls to get there. But the web, in fact, the web form, I'm going to set up a secure connection, proxy connection, where the web form can't talk to the database. The web form sends a message through another computer, says, hey, I have something I need to talk to you about. Now the database makes the connection, as it should. That's from Web 101. We're not going to get into a whole lot of web programming, but that's security in web. I have to tell you the name of the program. I'm probably, well, okay, I'm going to copy this and send it out to, I'm going to send this to the world. This is what the whole world gets to see. Yeah, it's in the, how do you use this program? Okay, RPS insert player inserts a player. I don't necessarily tell you that it's the player's table. I might not. It's okay to say that. So I might just say creates a player ID. So I might just say create player, creates a player ID. End users do not gain access to the table. The web form cannot see the table. The first parameter is a varchar 16. That's the player's user ID. Because I chose to have my players create their own user ID. I give you the name of the first parameter because this language supports calling by name, passing parameters by name. So I don't have to give you that. I could just say the first parameter is a varchar 16. It's the player's user ID. I don't typically pass parameters by name. It's just my bias. Yours may be different. Second parameter is the player's real name, and the third parameter is a tiny int. It is an output parameter, and its name is error level. Now, watch how I do this. So this is the way I'm going to do them, and I'll do it in all of them. Insert player. What comes into me? PID, PName, error level. That's the input parameters specified up here. Error level. I made it up. I didn't tell you you had to do it this way. This is my program. I didn't say yours had to have it. I have it. It's an output parameter. Yeah, keep it simple. Okay, let's look at what I do here. You can. I'm not going to write to the error table from here. This is my front door. Okay, people are going to put any kind of garbage in here. That's fine. What happens? The first thing I do is I set error level to 0, and I have a variable I'm calling CNT. Okay. Now I'm just going to go in order through them. I'm going to check this first parameter. This is straight, ladder, logic, nothing to it. Okay, error level 0, got me a count. Select the count. Is the PID there? Do I want the PID to be already in the table? It's primary key. It's coming in. No. What do I want it to be? 0. I'm checking to see if that PID already exists. Okay, now I'm going to check it. Is it null? Is the length 0? Or is the count greater than 0? Those are the bad things. I can't have, so I'm checking all 3 of them at the same swell foop. Right? Okay, go ahead.
I still question about the error label.
Error.
That's a good idea, but the next step we should also have the message, the error message. So
Okay.
people will know when they get this message.
trying to say your name.
Change.
Chen is suggesting that it needs to print a message. I disagree, respectfully. But I'm not saying it's wrong if it does, because a procedure is allowed to print a message. My question is, where is this procedure running? The procedure is running on the SQL server. Where is the user? The end user is sitting on his or her computer in New Zealand. Well, just let me finish. The question is, where can I, how, if I printed an error message from here, what good would that do? Because I'm going to print to the console of the server. But the person that's running on my server, but the person that's using it is probably remote.
So are you going to have a table at some point where you're populating that error level, you're pushing that error level into the table, and then that table's got an error message that you are going to send back to the user?
I could very easily do that, or I could provide that table to the user as email it to them, and let them deal with it. Basically, I'm going to document. Notice that I documented what happened. A 0 is success. 1 is a null user ID or user ID in use. 2 is null or 0 length name, and a 3 is contact, and anything else, anything but a 0 success, 1 or 2 is call me. We're about at break time. I'm going to finish these error messages. Okay, so anything else? Something bad happened.
So if the backend people get an error message, front-end people never to get it.
The what now?
They should, right? Let's say the backend people get the level 1.
Then you know that you have either a null user ID or the user ID is already in use.
And this error also shows in the backend. So
The error, it's a variable that you pass to the subroutine. You as the end user create a variable, pass it to the subroutine, or you see it in your web form as it comes out, and the web form's logic can take care of the messages. All I'm going to do is hand you the number.
So this document for the front-end people, we need a document for the backend.
Yes. It is good. Documentation is good. This is for the web programmer to know if you get a 0 back in that third parameter, everything's fine. If you get a 1 back in that parameter, you tell the user to check your username. Now, I also have a function that will check the username before they do that. So they have a way to check it before they send it. So I say, moron, you didn't check it. And then the second parameter, the player's real name cannot be null. Let's just look at it. I just plow through them. Boom, right here. Select the count, check the PID. If the PID is null or the length is 0 or the count, when the count comes back saying it's already there. It's already there. Set error level to 1. I'm done. I'm out of here. Else, if PName is null.
But and then you just start with 1. So how the front-end people know what the 1 means?
They read the documentation. They read this.
So we need a requirement for this, the error label 1012, right?
The requirement is that if you're going to send back a cryptic little number, which I'm going to do because that's the easiest thing to do, and then I write what they are. Well, I don't think that I don't want to throw I don't want to raise an error. I don't want to throw an exception, right? Because I want this. It is not an error. It is not a database error. When somebody puts in a null name, they're going to do it. It is not a database error when somebody fails to check to see if they can use that name and it said, no, you can't, that name's already in use. They're going to try it anyway. That's not a database error. It was expected. I caught it in the procedure logic, tossed it out. I'm not going to write, I don't need to write anything to the screen. I sent back something that you can tell what happened. If you don't look at it, that's your problem. My procedure won't let it through. Now, to figure out what comes back, well, that's your problem. Read the documentation. All right, read the fine manual. Yes. Okay.
Good practice is that procedures don't throw it. Right?
My first level, just coming in the door, I'm not going to throw exceptions. I'm not going to write the errata table. Okay? It's simple. KISS applies. Keep it short and simple, but that doesn't mean it's short. Else I check this one, set it to 2. Okay, so I've checked the first parameter. Notice this one only has 2 parameters. First parameter, second, 3 parameters. I'm sorry, the output parameter. I don't need to check the output parameter. It doesn't have a value when it comes in. Don't care. He's set to 0. Now he's at 0. So we've gotten past these first 2. Begin the try. There's my insert. Insert into players. My insert, the date I get from the system. So that's going to be right. PID is supposed to be right. PName is supposed to be right because I've checked them. And try at catch. If the catch goes bad, I set the error level to 99. That's the one that says if you see anything but a 0, 1, 2, when it comes back 99, contact tech support me immediately. Okay. And here I put these procedures are designed to work with web forms, therefore they do not print. They report their status in an output parameter. Now the rest of my procedures are the same way. I start plowing through them. Start with the first parameter, check the first parameter, make sure it's valid. Start with get the next parameter, check it, make sure it's valid. Next parameter, check it, make sure it's valid.
Get back just a minute to the insert player, like the 99.
Well, this is in a try block.
Oh, yeah, that set error level 99.
Okay, this is a try catch block. So this whole thing I call a try block. Try, and then it has a catch with it. If I throw an error in there, it doesn't abort the procedure. The procedure terminates normally. So I don't get that red error across the bottom of the page. The only thing I get is a 99 back. Something is dreadfully wrong here.
Something that we didn't foresee with our,
and I put that in there, insert failed. Insert is not supposed to fail. I'm not supposed to get there with something that causes that insert to fail. I'm supposed to have caught it before I got there. Okay, this is the last level of the first level of defense, right? So I'm going down through the ladder and I didn't catch it. It fell through my logic. It hit the database. The trigger threw it out. I need to figure out what went wrong and get that fixed because I never want to see a 99 go.
So would we use like this procedure with the constraint and the trigger?
Haven't gotten to the triggers yet. We're going to discuss them.
Like the procedure, do we have to like manually execute it or will it run automatically?
No,
Trigger
there's
sounds like it should be automatic, doesn't it, the word?
I mean the procedure.
Okay, here's my test routine. I'm going to talk about init, RPS init just wipes everything out and recreates everything. So it resets all the counters and empties the tables. Right here. So basically this would come from a web entry. So enter your player, put your username here. The other person puts it, they could be two different ones, and then they could get merged. That's web programming. It doesn't bother me. Somewhere in there, a web form that is connected to this, when they press a button that says do it, it's going to execute RPS insert player, and it's going to pass them player 1, player 2, and an error level variable, ERR. And then when it comes back, whenever this executes, we're going to see what it is. So when I execute this, bingo. Let's see, it would help if I... Okay, maybe I didn't, I haven't run those procedures yet on this machine. So, but when I run them, and I go through it, and then I run them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It would be nice if TSQL had a way that I could have kind of a macro that ran the scripts, but it doesn't. I've been looking for it on Google for a while. I'm learning this language also. I'm going to pause the recording now so that we can take a break. So I'm pausing. We're coming back in 10 minutes. Okay, turning on the recording. We're talking about the plays. This one is on line 50 here. It's got one that is legal. The first one is legal. Notice that that one is a test, and it returns a 0. Or I say returns. It sets the third parameter to 0. And then when I try to the same thing again, it sets the third parameter to 1, indicating that it's already there. Let's try to insert a game. I'm going to try to insert bouncer and slasher. I believe that one already exists with either bouncer and slasher or slasher and bouncer. That one fails with a 2. Insert game bouncer, bouncer. That fails with a 1 because they are equal. That's the point where it drops out in the logic. Insert game bouncer null. That one gets a little farther down in the logic before it goes. That throws a 4. I don't know why I've got the same one in there. 4, 4. This one has a bad player. Returns a 1. So a round with a bad player. This one is a round with a bad play, X. It returns a 2. And that's how far I've got to. Well, it's at some point I'm checking everything. I've got 4 parameters to check. Okay, if I check it, well, I will talk about insert round a little bit here. Not for very long. I'm not going to leave it up there because I do want you to write it yourself. But let's take a peek at the procedures. I'm going to scroll down to insert round, and I'm just going to talk. Insert round gets a little long, but notice that the first thing I do. See, the parameters to insert round are P1 ID, P2 ID. Make sure I'm recording. Am I test? Yes, I am. RPS here, RPS here, and then the error. So the input parameters are the IDs, not the game. That's the important point here. What's the first thing I do is, well, I set my error level to 0, declare a count as int, all of them. That's just the first thing I do on all of them. But then the next thing I do, which is really the first logical step, I grab the game ID based on the first 2 parameters. Now I've got the game ID. That's going to be important because I want, excuse me, I want to do the insert based on the player's IDs. They're not going to know the game ID. That I give them by a sequence. So if I give it to them by sequence, I either got to tell them or I tell them, okay, you are player 7. Don't forget that. So now he's going to have to enter a 7 every time. I guess if you told them, then they won't forget it, will they?
Sure they will, because they're going to be playing multiple games at the same time.
Yes, but their player ID won't change. They won't forget it. No, not if you tell them not to. Okay, and now what am I going to do? I don't have to test this. I mean, I don't have to check game ID. The only thing I have to check is it null? If it comes back null, those players don't have a game established. I don't know, maybe the player doesn't exist. Whatever, I'd never found that game. Now, maybe the players don't exist. I don't care. I don't check to see if the players exist. I check to see if the game exists. If the game ID comes back from that function as null, error level 1, I'm done. Check the token. So what am I going to do? I check that this game ID exists. I check the token. Is it RPS? I check the token here. Is it RPS? Okay. So the big thing here, what I could have done, I could have in the procedure call, this would have worked. I'm not necessarily suggesting it. Let's see. Insert round. Okay, that's okay. This will work. No, it's not going to work here because of the way that I have written the procedure. But if that procedure was expecting the game ID, that would be a legal procedure call if the procedure received the game ID instead of the two players. Because what that function returns the game ID. Now this one's throwing red lines because it's incorrect syntax, but this one looks up the game ID right there on the input line. So what we've got is what we call composition of functions, you know, f of g of x, and it works. So that would be legal. Had I put an insert round, had insert round taken the game ID as a parameter, then I could have done it like this. Okay, because this is the game ID. It's a function that returns the game ID. It won't work unless I go back and redo my parameters. Questions? Okay, quickly moving on here. I do not want to save that, no. Okay. I'm going to go into my server, right? First thing I have to do is I connect. And I'm going to connect with Windows Authentication. When I connect with Windows Authentication, what am I in as? Admin. And we can set up our admin to connect through SQL Server Authentication. Most of the time it's not. Okay, down here is my admin user. My admin user, I'm going to say security. Logins. My logins, I'm going to go to the logins, a new login, and I'm going to create a login with SQL Server Authentication. I'm going to call this user public user. Okay. You have to do this on every computer that you're testing it on. Give Mr. Public User a password. By the way, I put this in a recording last night to you. Uncheck password expiration. The default database, make his default database RPSDB. Now, it doesn't have to be RPSDB. He has to have a default database. It can't be master, so he may as well be RPSDB. Now, he won't really have a right to do much there. Okay. Now, I'm going to say, okay. Password fields don't match. Okay, Mr. Public User, go back to Public User and go to his properties. Under his properties, I see all this stuff. Everything looks fine here. I'm going to go to the user mapping. Right? And users mapped to this login, I'm going to check RPSDB. That makes him a user of RPSDB, so he can see the stuff that's in there. What is he? He is public and only public. Right? This is how the web user, the web form is going to log in as public. Okay? Now, so this is the web's login. We say okay. And now I think we're done with him. Disconnect here. This guy, when I open this test form, so I've made it 100. That's where I test, because I might put some other stuff up there. Okay. 99 is the grant. I want this one to happen last. Grant. Grant, execute on the functions to public. I didn't say public user, public. Everybody gets to execute. RPS user is there. Well, might be handy if I did the use first. Okay, so now I'm the owner and I'm granting people the right to use the stuff. I'm going to grant, I might talk about RPS init. RPS init just basically deletes all the rows in the table and resets the sequences. So I don't have to go in and do them manually. What? I made it. I'll show it to you. And then you have to have alter on the sequences so that you can update them. I don't like this. I don't think I should have to do this, but I did. And then these are the views. I have RPS, public RPS players, public RPS games, public RPS rounds. Those are views that I've just demonstrated restricting what I'm going to let the users see. So I'm going to give them select on those guys. So let me pull this down. Basically, I think that's all of it there. Grant execute on the functions and the procedures. Grant alter on the sequences. Why alter on the sequences? I don't like to do that. I don't think I should have to do that because the sequences are being run from the procedures. So they should, if the procedure does it, it should be fine, but it's making me give him alter on the sequences before it will let me select it.
Oh, because you're selecting.
It changes the procedure, yes. I don't think they can't see it. I don't think they can select from it, but they have to have that. I'm going to try to find a way around that. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and grant alter, grant select. I'll give you this this code. I mean, or you can write it down. It's just grant. It's just grants. If I grant you something, and to take the right of way, I say revoke execute on RPS is there from public. So change the grant to revoke and the to a from, and it takes it away from. Okay. Now, since I have done these, I go over here to 100. If I execute this, everything's fine. Now, but I'm SW Smith. The thing of it is, I'm going to change my connection. Instead of SW Smith, I'm going to become public user. Now, up here in the heading, I see that in this window, what am I? I am public user. Okay, I'm going to demonstrate that that I can execute this. So I execute, and notice it executes just fine. Execute, have the good stuff and bad stuff. If I scroll down, though, at the very end, I think I have some other stuff. I have select statements. So I'm going to try to select from RPS players. Can I see RPS players? And the answer is that no, I cannot. I can't see it. I can't see rounds. I can't see games. I have no way of getting in there and doing anything except what I've been given the permission to do through those grant statements. Now, a couple of things about it. With that grant, I suggest you may put the grants in the table where they are created, if you want to. If you alter a table or anything, if you go back in there and make some changes into that table and you create or alter the table, so anytime you run that procedure, I think it will revoke the permission. If you change the table in most platforms, you revoke all the permissions. So you have to give them back. So if, as you create the table, if you want to grant, no, as you create the procedures, if you want to grant execute on the procedures, as just right after you've created the procedure, then grant execute to public. Fine. Well, yeah, to test it, when you're just developing your procedures, just run it as you. So you're running as the database owner, but you do not want your web form to be running it as the database owner. Typically speaking, you have 3 users for any application. You have the table owner. So this is the person who owns the tables. The person who does the programming gets the ability to insert, update, delete, select from the tables, but does not get the privilege to alter the tables. Right? The table owner sets them. Now they're set. So the programmer cannot drop the tables. So that's run as it's probably the same person, just different logins. So you log in once, create the tables, log in again, and now you create your programming objects, your procedures. Your procedures can see the tables, they can change the tables, but they can't drop the tables. gives that. Now you have a public user, that's your web form user. Web user gets execute on your code, and that's it. Right? Notice that I have given them select on the view. This is a view. I'll show you creating the views. When I execute that, he gets to see the names of the players. Select, what will I show him about the games? I will show him game one, player 2. I'm not going to show you the game ID. You don't need to know the game ID. Let the code take care of that. So that might be something you'd want to know. I don't show you the players' real names. You can't see them. You can't get into that. You can't get to RPS games. If you try to execute games, you get an error. If you try to look at games, there's no such table. RPS rounds, again, the RPS rounds is not getting inserted. It doesn't, yes it is. Okay. I guess I got that trigger fixed. Now if I try to delete from the view, can I delete from a view? Sometimes. Not from this one. Why? Because you can't even, you're not even allowed, all you have is select. You don't have delete. It stops you before, and then it would get down to the table level, and it would stop you there because you can't delete from the table. So you have very limited rights here. And here I'm trying to do an insert into RPS players, and this is a legal insert, or would be. There's no such player as that. Notice it's saying you can't even see it. Permission denied. You can't touch it. Okay. And so this is our first level. It pushes you back. Actually, it's a fairly effective level because it's not that the procedure is that great. You know, the procedures really aren't that, your procedures should be simple. Keep them simple. Right? That's why I don't mind showing them to you. Keep them simple. Don't copy mine. You can write better code than I can, probably. There's really nothing to it. A couple of other things I wanted to show you. The grants. Let me open, what am I opening? I've shown you the procedures. Triggers we'll talk about, okay, creating the views. I just created a few views just for funsies. I would like you to demonstrate a view. You can decide what you want to show. Show a limited amount. For example, in the public, I show only the RPS, I show only the PID. That's just for demonstration purposes. Notice that I aliased it. I put a space in there. Do we ever put spaces in there? Not unless we have a good reason to. There's no reason I needed to put that space in the view, and there's no reason I couldn't have just left it PID because I'm going to pass it up to a web form, and the web form can label it any way they want to. Right. Sure. Sure. You want to create a view that has the function, a winner function in it. Remember your winner function? Go get that, put it in there. Sure. You can create any view you want. I would suggest maybe you'll create a view that shows how many games did a given player win. What we're going to, there'll be some other stuff that we can do here. Some things about the functions that are very, very advanced concepts. I'm going to cover triggers well first, but I'm about to wrap up here because I'm about out of time for tonight. 11 minutes, that's not enough time to go into triggers. I was always scared when I was a beginning teacher back in the 70s that I'd get in front of a class and not have anything to say.
You can ask the students that.
I've never run out of things to say. Anyway, what I do, I ran across my father's first teaching certificate, and I was going through some family documents, and I ran across my father's first teaching certificate that was issued in Oklahoma in 1939. Yeah, for teaching, high school teaching. Creating the view is pretty simple. I don't use the views to affect a lot of security. I don't really need to, since the user cannot see that table, I don't have to worry about him changing the table. He can't see the table. He has no rights to that table at all. He only has rights to the view. Therefore, I don't have to really worry about write-throughs on it. So I don't need that with check constraint. Do you know what that means, right? You can't, well, there's no where on the view. I just show you everything. Down here on the rounds, I'm going to show you rounds, but I do an inner join here because I want to show you the player 1 and player 2, but I don't have player 1 and player 2 in the rounds table. Right, so I show them to you anyway with the table of join. In an advanced class, I let people drop the inner. So you can just say join. Yes, programmers do that. So if you said table 1, join table 2. If you said that in my 1309 class, I'd come away from your code with bloody hands. But in an advanced class, we do it. You can also drop the, let's see. This, I think this as is required, but if you dropped this as, it would work. That's not required. So there's several places that you can. I always teach it and I always program using the full syntax. But I only really enforce the full syntax in the beginning class. When we get here, we don't. Okay, where are we going from here? Next. Okay. What? Well, we're about to wrap up here. I'm just showing you. Next class, we're going to do triggers, and then we'll add the triggers to our project, and that gets added. Where do I add it? I do the triggers after the procedures and just before the views. So if you want to go ahead, if you want to put that file in there, you just say use RPS, and just a placeholder file, and then there we'll start creating the triggers. If just hang one second, don't create a null trigger just as a placeholder. It will block any insert. So if you say, create trigger, insert trigger, as instead of insert, begin, end, begin, do nothing, end, and you'll do nothing. So then when you insert, you'll do nothing instead. Lots of times you'll block delete that way. If you're not supposed to delete, like in a trigger, if a trigger detects an error, I'm definitely going to write the errata table. And I'm definitely going to throw a database error. And the procedure level, I don't. Questions. We have another thing that we can do here. A function can execute a select statement and return a table as its value. That is a very powerful idea because a SQL statement, a select from where statement, does not take parameters. by the definition, it's an ancient language. It doesn't know what a parameter is. But if I wrap it around, or if I wrap a function around it, send parameters in, execute the SQL inside of a function, I can return the output of that SQL statement from the function. Very powerful idea. First thing we're going to do, though, is talk about triggers. Next time. And it is 7:55. Donna.
For the procedural RPS init, can you explain a little bit more about
Oh, okay. She wants to see RPS init. It's very straightforward.
everything?
Delete everything. There is a I haven't been able to get it to work. There is another one that is actually better than delete from. It's called truncate. I wasn't able to get it running. I should be. Rounds, delete from rounds. Rounds is the grandchild, games is the child, players is the parent. So that's the correct order. It was giving me a foreign key constraint error on truncate. This should work. Is it truncate table?
You're in public user, does that?
Oh yes, it does matter quite a bit. Yeah. Public user cannot do that, but public user has execute on this, so public user can. Maybe that was why, because it wasn't letting public user truncate. Basically, I just say delete from RPS rounds, delete from games, delete from players. Then I alter sequence, restart with 1. No, this is I don't believe it. Is it in there? Okay, it might be. Okay, I'm looking here. Sure. Yeah. You know what danger Will Robinson means, Donna?
I don't know. Lost in space.
Lost in. There was an old TV show that had a robot, and the robot was very dumb looking. He looked like a guy in a box, and he had these arms, and he'd run around waving his arms saying, "Danger, danger, danger, Will Robinson." Will Robinson was the guy who was lost in space. Ending the recording now. Ending the recording.